Welcome to the Legally Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Rob Hanna. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Laura Brunnen. Laura is the founder and director of the Legal Strategist Limited, a B2B legal consulting and education business in which she brings expert big business legal advice to new and growing businesses. Prior to this, Laura worked as a private equity partner at a global law firm, Reed Smith, advising on international private equity transactions. In 2017, Laura became the first woman to lead the winning private equity team of the year at the British Legal Awards, and in the same year founded the 1973 Club, a social network for women in private equity. If that wasn't impressive enough, Laura is also a speaker and advocate for gender equality in her spare time, is a very avid baker. So a very, very warm welcome, Laura.
Wow, thank you for that, Rob. Wow, I don't quite recognise myself from that. It's weird when you hear someone saying it, but thank you. Very pleased to be here.
It's our absolute pleasure. And before we dive into all your amazing achievements and experiences to date, we do have a customary icebreaker question here on the Legally Speaking podcast, which is, on the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very real, what would you rate the hit TV series Suits in terms of its reality?
Okay, confession time. I've only ever seen snippets, okay? So my rating is going to be based on my snippets.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to vote it a 1. Because I've never come across any partner that looks like or acts like Harvey. And there's no way, what's the guy called? Mike? No way he'd just sneak in without some sort of proper legal qualification. So that always annoyed me that he was able to do that. So I'm going to have to give it a 1.
Yeah.
But that's, all legal dramas are pretty much not very accurate, so can't really hold it against Suits, really.
No, exactly. I think 1, given that, I think it's pretty unlikely most lawyers are getting in without any form of qualification. So fair comment. But
and having been in New York law firms and walked around their offices, they're not like that. Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. But let's start at the beginning before we get there. So tell our listeners a bit about your family background and upbringing.
Oh gosh, well, come from a very ordinary working class family, went to my local state comp, first in my family to do GCSEs and A-levels, and obviously then first in my family to go to university.
Yeah, good stuff. And then you started your career with Slaughter and May. How did you find that period of your life with them?
So it's one of those things, I was talking to someone else about this the other day because, they were like, did you really comprehend when you were at Slaughter's what sort of, blue blood firm you were in? And I think the answer is not really. So I started at Slaughter's back in 2000, so 21 years ago now. Gosh. Yeah. Totally clueless. I ended up at Slaughter's because when I applied for training contracts, there was only one of 3 firms open to start in autumn 2000. Managed to get through the training contract interview, and I turned up and I don't know, as I said, totally clueless. And, training contracts in those days were very different to what they are now. You spent a lot of time paginating, proofreading, the sort of the experience that trainees get now, where they actually get to sort of work with clients and work on proper transaction documents. That was sort of what light years away from what we did as trainees. But Slaughter's got one of these places that got a bit of reputation, but actually I thought it was a very nice, friendly place to work. I can't think of a bad word to say about anyone, to be honest.
Good. And then, as I mentioned in my introduction, you previously worked as a private equity partner at Reed Smith with some amazing clients such as L'Oreal. So what was that like, and what experiences did that provide you with?
So I actually started doing private equity at Kirkland & Ellis back in 2007. And that was a real contrast. So, I spent over 6 years at Slaughter's working for public listed companies, doing public M&A, takeovers, all that sort of stuff. And I actually went to K&E as a public M&A takeover code specialist. And then, great timing, Laura, that's when the market fell out. I got to do one from beginning to end, and we worked on a couple of others. So I turned myself into a private M&A specialist at K&E, and the contrast between the clients was really interesting. So with PLC clients, you're sort of at the top. The way I like to describe it is you're at the top of like this little gentle, not even a hill, it's a gentle slope. And you're sort of just trying to nudge them down the slope to say, look, it's fine. You can do this. There's no problem. This is something you can do. With PE clients, certainly then it was more, they're dangling off the edge of the cliff and you're desperately, holding on to them by the ankles, trying to stop them doing something really stupid. So, I mean, that's a bit of a facetious way, and I'm sure my more recent private equity clients would be quite offended to hear private equity described like that. But, it's just a sort of a fun way of trying to demonstrate the difference between the sort of the client thinking, with the PLC clients, it's all very constrained by things like the listing rules and, all the public perception and, all the quarterly reporting and everything else, as compared with private equity, where obviously they've got a lot more leeway to run the business as they see fit and so forth. So, it's very, it's very fast paced doing private equity. I'd say more so in some ways than M&A, than public M&A. Public M&A tends to have a fixed timetable, and you've got to do certain things by a certain deadline and so on and so forth. Whereas with private M&A, it's always like, we've got to get this done. Got to get this done now. Got to get this done yesterday. And it's quite funny the amount of times you get a heads of terms or a letter of intent that would say, right, exclusivity period runs out in 6 weeks and we must get the deal signed within 6 weeks. And you just sort of look at each other and go, 90% of the time that never happened. 90% of the time it probably went on for another 6 to 12 weeks. But, it's always like this false sense of urgency, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, and I love it. And your career, you've always sort of taken on challenges. And that's what brings me on to my next point. So as I mentioned, you've also recently begun your own startup, the Legal Strategist Limited. Why did you decide to take this transition? And tell us a bit more about your exciting company.
Okay, so I've been corporate M&A lawyer in the city for 20 years. There were lots of things that frustrated me about it. And it's sort of one of those situations where you think, actually, you come to the conclusion, actually, it's not them, it's me, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'd come to this stage in my career, I was like, well, I've got probably another 20 years of working. There are various things with this way of working in a big law firm that don't fit with my personality and don't suit me or the way I like to work. And that's not me being derogatory about the big law firms, because obviously they've got a lot going for them and they work for a lot of people. But I'm 45 now. I've come to a stage where I sort of understand myself a bit more, and maybe it would have been good if I could have got to that stage a bit earlier. But I was like, actually, I want to be able to make those decisions for myself and run things and talk about things in a way it sounds cheesy, but it's true to me.
Yeah.
And so, I did look at going to one of the virtual law platforms like Keystone or something. But then I thought, well, actually, why don't I just do it myself? Because, nowadays, with the deregulation of the legal industry, I've set up a company and I don't have to be SRA regulated. So all that side, what I do, M&A advisory, isn't a reserved service or isn't a reserved activity. So I've kept my own personal regulation as a solicitor, but my company doesn't have to deal with all the red tape or the overheads that SRA regulation brings with it. And so my company has sort of got two arms to it. So the first arm is sort of M&A shareholder investment advisory work, sort of really building on what I've spent the last 20 years doing, which is buying and selling and running and structuring companies. And so I'm working on that with, M&A boutiques. I've got a couple of ex-corporate, couple of ex-clients from the law firms, getting some new clients as well from LinkedIn and elsewhere. And that's sort of the one-to-one consultancy advisory work. And then on the other side, which is going to take a little bit of time to build up, is what I'm calling the one-to-many side of the business, right? And there's nearly 6 million small medium businesses in the UK, and I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I think there were like nearly 700,000 new companies set up last year in 2020, and the SME market generally feels like it's not served very well by the legal sector. People have got all these perceptions of lawyers. We're wordy, we're expensive, we find problems, we're pompous, we treat people like idiots. And so there are lots of things that are barriers or perceived barriers to sort of smaller businesses using lawyers properly. And so, on that side of the business, I'm building an online program to sort of run small business owners through to sort of equip them with everything they need to know and understand. I'm just moving slightly to the sun. Everything they need to know and understand with regards to running a business, right? And that's sort of plugging a gap, I think, because there are some obviously people can go to lawyers and they're prepared to spend 5-10 grand setting their business up. Others, understandably, are not. And then, there are some people that will go and buy a bunch of templates or try and Google legal templates from the internet, which just makes me want to weep. So I'm trying to sort of plug the gap and provide some sort of hybrid product. Because, when I was working out what I wanted to do, one of the things I enjoy and I think I'm good at is teaching. Which is a bit ironic, but it's something I've done with the junior associates for a long time. Is mentoring and teaching and so on and so forth. And I thought, well, how can I translate that to a different market? So now the idea is to teach and educate and help small business owners implement these things to get their businesses in a better position than they otherwise would be, and stop those small annoying things that crop up from time to time and drain your energy and take up a lot of time and distract your focus. So if you've got all of that stuff sorted, you can then focus on what you enjoy doing in your business and growing it and building it.
Yeah, and I just think it's wonderful what you do, because there is a need. And I think, a lot of small business owners, a lot of startups, are scared, when they hear the word lawyers and legal fees and, whether they can afford it, whether they're going to get an advisory service, whether they're going to be left on the shelf. So I think you really do, have a wonderful service offering where people are getting a very high caliber service, but without all of the sort of, the red tape and all of the hassle that goes with it. So no, I think it's wonderful. So really excited to see the journey of the company. But on that, what advice would you give to someone about thinking about starting their own business from your own experiences thus far?
Spend a bit of time working out what all the areas of your business you need to cover are. So, for example, I spent a bit of time learning about marketing and sales and branding before I launched, because I learned how to market and how to use LinkedIn more effectively, what you needed to do on Instagram, building a brand. When I first wrote I'm just scouring around for my first notebook on all of this, but, I wrote down, what's my name going to be? What's my logo? What fonts am I going to use? Yeah. And then I went on a brand program, which was excellent, actually, at the beginning of the year. And she's like, your brand is not about your fonts and your logos and your colours. That's your visual branding. But the actual branding goes much deeper than that. It's about what you stand for, who you are, who your client is, how you speak, what you talk about, how you talk about it. So I would say spend some time figuring out what all the different components of your business are and what you can do yourself and what you need to learn about and what you should outsource. So for me, I outsourced a lot of the tech. I got someone to help me build my website, connect all the widgets together, for want of a better word, because it just stressed me out and would take so much time. And I'd rather, spend some money getting someone who knows what they're doing to do that. So for me, obviously I did my own legals. I learned about branding and sales, and I've been doing all of that myself. But having educated myself about it, I've obviously outsourced to an accountant. I've outsourced the tech. So just sort of think about your business as in all the different departments and what you need, really, and try not to be over ambitious either. Just sort of start out with minimum viable product. I've got a funny story about this. So this must have been back in June, I was desperately trying to get my website ready, and I had some ideas about certain things that needed to be perfect before I launched, because I was a lawyer and I had to show best practice and practice what I preach. And anyway, I was talking to one of my friends who is he's not a web designer, but he knows all about how to put websites together and how, SEO and all that stuff that frankly I still don't understand. And I was getting stressed. I was like, well, I've got to do all these things on my website and I've got to put this together and that together. And he said, Laura, who's going to look? No one's going to care. I'm like, but it's got to be right. He said, no one's going to care. And by the way, I would delete 3/4 of what you've written on your homepage because no one's going to read it and no one's going to care.
Yeah.
And, when you do launch, there's probably going to be crickets, or certainly you're not going to be as busy as you would like. So use that time to get some of this less important stuff done. So that's another way of saying what people say is done is better than perfect is one of the phrases I keep seeing winging its way around LinkedIn. So just work out what the minimum you need to get started is and just go for it. Because if you start trying to make sure everything's absolutely perfect and good to go, you just drive yourself crazy. And and what you think is important might not be important to your customers anyway.
I think that's such good advice. And, I've fallen into that trap myself when I've started my own businesses. And I think, I'd always say, imperfect action over perfect, inaction any day of the week. So, love that.
And now, time for a short quiz. Can you guess how many of your prospective clients now expect to work with you online? If you guessed almost 4 out of 5, or 79%, you got it right. Want to learn more about where the future of the legal profession is headed? Then leading practice management software provider Clio has just released a resource I think you're all going to love. In their 2021 Legal Trends Report, they compiled data from tens of thousands of legal professionals to chart the major upcoming trends for law firms. The annual Legal Trends Report is released every October, and you can get your copy for free at clio.com/legal trends. That's CLIO.com/legal trends. Now back to the show.
So with the Legal Strategist, you also very kindly offer a number of free resources. So can you tell our listeners a bit about this and how they can access them?
Well, sure. So a couple of free resources. So I offer us, a free, what I call a free discovery call. Where, which is depending on what you're looking for is 20 to 30 minutes long. And to be honest, it's normally a bit longer than that because I don't say, 30 minutes is up, disconnect. So, I've helped a lot of people with my free 30 minutes because particularly if I'm asking you to spend X amount in fees with me, you need to get a sense of, are we going to work well together? Can you understand what I'm saying? So people come to me if they're thinking about setting up a business and we can sort of talk around some of the issues that, might come up and what they need to think about. Just generally with my consultancy as well, I'll do a free, half an hour, 45 minutes discussion. And then the other free resource I have at the moment is a guide to how to apply for your UK trademark. So, I'm a big advocate of where you can do things for yourself for free, where it's quick, it's easy, and it's relatively risk-free, then us lawyers shouldn't be hogging the knowledge and the know-how. So, more sun here, but with trademarks, for most of us, we only need one or two. We don't need a whole portfolio of them. And so I've put together this resource which sort of walks you through how to apply for it. And it comes with a couple of videos as well. And then obviously I've got my Instagram account, which is I am Laura Brunnen. And I often post, legal tips and advice there. And I'm always happy to hear from people if there's things they would like me to cover or talk about more. Because from my perspective, it's all about demystifying things, I have a Mythbuster series, a Jargon Buster series, legal tips. One of my Mythbusters was, does your business have to be a company? Because everyone's obsessed with setting up a company and being a company director. And, out of, I think, as I said earlier, about 6 million small businesses in the UK, 3.5 million are sole traders. They're not limited companies. And so should those sole traders be limited companies? Well, maybe some of them should be, but there are different ways of structuring your business. And I think people get too hung up on, the whole being a company thing. And then when they do think about being a company, they get worried that there's a lot of bureaucracy, cost and red tape. And again, if you're a small business or, there's one or two of you, you can do it relatively smoothly with not too much bureaucracy or red tape. And, if it's just you, then it's relatively easy and there's not lots of paperwork or filings or anything like that. So I'm just sort of trying to demystify things and sort of say to people, this is important. Yes, that's important, but you don't lose sleep over these things, at night. Like, GDPR is a perfect example of that. We all need to get data privacy right and make sure we've got proper policies and processes in place. But don't get super stressed by it. When you go on the Information Commissioner's website about fines that have been levied, I think they've issued 72 since 2018. And it's for people that are totally spamming people with like hundreds of thousands of emails or calls. It's not for most small business owners that have messed up a couple of things. Yeah. That's not to say you shouldn't do it and get it right, but try not to get so stressed and turn it into this huge problem in your head.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, on a sort of positive note as well, you're no stranger to the media. You've been featured in The Telegraph, The Lawyer, Bloomberg Law. So tell our listeners the sort of things you tend to get interviewed for.
Well, pre jumping off by myself, I used to get interviewed, for things to do with M&A tips or what was going on in the M&A market, or last year, private equity insights. I was on a panel for top 40 under 40 diversity and inclusion. So, I was often asked to comment on things, from a legal perspective. I think back in 2017, I was featured in The Lawyer as, one of the top female deal makers in the private equity space. And there's a lot of people on that front cover that, people that are familiar with the PE space will recognise. So that was quite nice to be featured like that. Since I left and set up by myself, it's more about why I've left, what Big Law was like, what could be better, how I'm finding life as a startup. I sort of hesitate to use the word, an entrepreneur, because that sounds, at the moment it's just me, but I do have plans to, I don't want this just to be a job, Rob. Okay. I don't want this just to be me churning out legal work by myself for the next 10, 15, 20 years. And then I come to retire and the whole business just goes poof, I want to build something, because the ultimate goal is to have a business that is more than me and can run without me, and ultimately is something that I can exit when I decide I don't want to work anymore.
Yeah, and good for you. And I'm sure that's definitely going to happen. I'm excited to see the journey. So you're also the founder, as I mentioned in the introduction, the 1973 Club, so a social network for women in private equity. Tell us a bit more about the network and why you felt the need to create it.
So that I came up with the idea for that about 4.5 years ago, actually, when I just joined Reed Smith early 2017. And as a woman in private equity, you're used to being one of a few, but it got to the stage where I'm like, this is getting a bit ridiculous. I know there are other females in the PE space, but where are they? And you'd go to the main networking events and it was, you were just so outnumbered. And it's not like most of the chaps were unpleasant or horrible, nothing like that. But, you just feel like you can't quite be yourself, if that makes sense. And, and I think the tip of the thing that pushed me over the edge was I worked on a transaction and I'm being in a meeting, and there were 22 of us in this meeting to get this deal done. There were 11 on one side and 11 on our side. And out of the 22, there were 2 women in the room, me and the senior associate working with me on the deal. The rest of it was blokes. And then a closing dinner for a different transaction. Again, there must have been about 20, 25 at this dinner. It was the PE house, the investment bank, the management team, the accountants, you name it, the lawyers. Again, well, it's even worse, actually. I was the only woman. And again, no one's unpleasant, although it did make me laugh at the dinner. we had they did a quiz because we'd sold a business related to cars. And they did a quiz about Formula One, and they sort of said at the beginning, "Oh, really sorry, Laura," and I'm like, "Okay, that's fine." The first question I didn't know the answer to, and my client got the question right and won a bottle of champagne and gave it to me, which was so sweet. And then the second question I got right.
Hey.
And they're all a bit like, "Who's this ringer?" I'm like, "Well, I did used to like Formula One, don't anymore." But anyway, so I graciously declined to take my second bottle of wine. But anyway, so that was sort of a long way of saying I just knew there were other people out there, and I'd finally started working with private, female principals at the private equity houses. So I'd worked with like Fleur Cassai at Inflection when I was at KWM, and I knew they were out there. And there was obviously other organisations out there that like Level 20, which has been set up by the PE houses themselves, but that was very structured, if that makes sense. And also, it was more focused on the women in the PE houses rather than the rest of us. So anyway, so I thought, well, I just want to do something where we get to know each other in an informal environment. So I put a proof of concept together. Went to Reed Smith Management. They were very supportive and loved the idea. And came up with it. And so, the BD team really helped me, and we sort of held 2 or 3 events a year. We, did fun things. So we started off we did a launch at Burberry. We did another event at a Mayfair Jewellers. We did something at Space NK. We went to a art gallery. It was very lovely, but it's meant to be fun and relaxing. And we also partnered up with a charity called Child's Eye Foundation. So we also sort of tried, it was women helping women. And we sort of worked together to help raise money for them as well.
Brilliant. So wonderful. And I'm glad about that. And yeah, good for you maybe not taking the second bottle. And what was the question? Can you remember?
I can't remember, but the answer was Jackie Stewart.
There we go.
I can remember the answer.
Good stuff. Okay. And as we discussed earlier as well, you are a speaker, you're an advocate for gender equality. And in 2017, you became the first woman to lead the winning private equity team of the year at the British Legal Awards. What do you think are the benefits of having women in leadership positions?
Well, you've asked me questions I've not thought that deeply about, Rob. So this is all completely off the cuff. But I don't want to stereotype because we are all different. But I think I think generally speaking, women possibly try to understand the other point of view a bit more and try to play the man, if that makes sense, not the ball. So, I will adapt how I respond and deal with people depending on them and what they're like. And I sort of try and map out, well, if they're going to do this, then maybe I'll do that because then they're more likely to do what I want them to do. Whereas I think, again, very, very generally speaking, I think men in leadership positions tend to sort of just push things through in a less, what's the word I'm looking for? But they're with less consent. They don't need the consensus, and maybe I think sometimes women in leadership, we need too much consensus, and we care too much about everyone being happy, right? So I think there's a happy medium to be held there. But also, it's not just about women in leadership. It's just about people generally being in leadership. It's the more difference voices there are, and also just there being role models for kids and young people coming up through the system, and just seeing people up there and going, well, they've made it, so I might have a shot at it too. Whereas if it's just a bunch of sorry chaps, but white middle-aged men, that's not very inspiring for a lot of people. Unless you happen to be a white man who wants to be a white middle-aged man. Which, I'd have thought most young white men would want to be middle-aged, but you know what I mean. So it's I think it's just about having diversity of voices and different thoughts and different ways of dealing with people, because we all can learn from each other. No one's perfect, no one's got all the answers. And I think McKinsey did some reports on this. that actually more diverse organisations are more profitable. Now, I don't know if that's, a causation's not correlation. But, there have been various reports about that. So if you look at it from a more selfish perspective, then you're going to make your business is likely to make more money if you sort of are more open to, bringing different people to the table.
Yeah, really well said. And I couldn't agree more. And finally, before we wrap up, what advice would you give to young women entering the legal profession in 2021 and beyond?
Get out. No, you're going to have to delete that bit. You could have told me you were going to ask me that. Oh, God. What advice would I give? I'd say be clear in who you are and what you're interested in. Get as many experiences as you can, learn from as many people as you can, but try and get a real sense of what drives you and what interests you. Because, if you're going to be in this career for the next 20, 30, 40 years, it's got to be doing something you love. Don't just do it for the perceived prestige or, for the money, because one day that won't sustain you.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And if people want to follow or get in touch with you about anything we've discussed today, what's the best way for them to do that? Feel free to shout out your website links or relevant social media. We'll also make sure we share them with this episode for you as well.
Well, I think the best place is probably to find me on LinkedIn. So I'm the only Laura Brunnen I've ever found on the internet. So look for Laura Brunnen on LinkedIn. I also have a website, www.laurabrunnen.com, funnily enough. And I'm also on Instagram at I am Laura Brunnen, because although I'm the only Laura Brunnen, someone else has nicked Laura Brunnen on Instagram, even though she's called Laura Brunelli. I'm like, give me my name back.
Instagram challenges. But there we go. Thank you so much, Laura, for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on. Wishing you lots of continued success with the Legal Strategist Limited and everything you've got planned for the future. But from all of us on the Legally Speaking podcast, over and out.
This week's review comes from Yassim Mikel. Amazing, 5 stars, really interesting and engaging podcast, covering a wide range of topics, providing an in-detail insight into the legal industry. Thank you so much, Yassim. We really appreciate your lovely, kind words and support for the Legally Speaking podcast. From all of us on the show, thank you so much once again.